Lower Manhattan had been in recovery mode for several years when developers building a world-class tower to be designed by Frank Gehry secured more than $600 million in construction financing on a site just a couple blocks away from Ground Zero. It was March 28, 2008, just weeks before the financial crisis hit full force.
Bear Stearns goes into bankruptcy, gets bought out by JP Morgan. The beginning of the end is occurring.
With financing in place, the developers proceeded with construction, but the financial crisis worsened in 2009.
We found ourselves with a lot of leverage, 6 skittish lenders.
Around 30 floors of the building were already framed out.
Is this the little building that could, or is this a catastrophe in the waiting? I had the great benefit of calling Frank Gehry and telling him that we might be truncating the tower, which for him would have been the tallest building, the most important legacy project for Frank in his 80-plus years.
A New York City tower with Frank Gehry's signature was an opportunity that the developers were not going to give up on easily.
Every time we cross the Brooklyn Bridge and look at this tower, if it stops, it would be something that we will approach with heavy hearts, because in the life of a developer, you only get to do something like this once. You can never replicate this type of opportunity.
It was big news when the New York Presbyterian Hospital in the center of Lower Manhattan put its 1-acre parking lot on the market.
This, I would say, was a long-coveted parking lot for developers in New York City.
What was envisioned was a rental apartment building with world-class architecture, an unlikely combination for New York City.
I like to say that the bar for developing design-driven rental properties in New York City has historically been quite low. If we could do anything at all with this property, how extraordinary it would be if we could create a building unlike any building that has ever been built in New York.
Developers had their eye on Frank Gehry to design it.
For Frank, it was also an ideal time where he was also looking to the next barrier, or like the next frontier, really.
We set a very high bar for what we tried to do. The hospital liked the idea of having a neighbor that would be architecturally significant, that would leave a mark on the city skyline, that in some ways would become the new picture postcard image for Lower Manhattan post 9/11.
The project would be the tallest residential tower in the Western Hemisphere, with 900 rental units, 2 plazas, a public school at the base, a floor of doctor's offices, and underground parking.
We had all of this going on where we're designing this great building. We have Frank at the helm.
Developers rushed into construction in 2006, just in time to secure a tax benefit about to expire.
We do this with equity, which in the world of ground-up developers is rule number 1 that you don't break, which is you don't start a building until you have a construction loan.
The construction loan was closed 2 years later, in March 2008.
It was a $680 million loan with 6 lenders. And I would say to you that 2 weeks after closing it, it would be unreplicatable based on the recession.
Timing is everything in development, both in a positive and a negative. The bigger the project, the more risk of developing through cycles, and this was a perfect case study.
We were under construction. We had bought everything out at the height of the market. So we were literally like the 30th floor.
The call went into Frank.
I called Frank and I said, look, here's the situation. The world is quite uncertain. Yes, we have lenders, but everybody is deeply concerned. We may need to just stop building. Nothing wrong with a 40-story building. It's highly respectable. Your design will prevail, but it might just be a tad bit shorter in the skyline.
Construction was halted in 2009. The developers called in the lenders, called in the unions, called in marketing to measure the demand for 900 prospects for a building like this in a city like New York post-recession.
So we had these 3 fronts that we were driving to figure out whether we should stop or go. And certainly if we had built an ordinary, forgettable residential tower, it would have been open. It was in some ways the labor of love that we had engaged in that had caused us to drive ourselves right into the headwinds of the recession. But some of us were so deeply committed that these buildings become like children. You nurture them and you stick with them and you work out your issues as you go, but you never give up. I'll never forget, Frank said, Marianne, if I have to babysit for the children of the people that live in this building, I will do whatever I have to do to see that this building get built.
And there was something he could do: give his name. Gehry allowed the developers to use the Gehry name for naming and marketing of the building, and the developers were able to negotiate with the unions on labor. They rebid everything that wasn't signed and in the end, cut $25 million from the construction budget.
That trifecta gave us the package of goods that we believe we needed to go in and fight for the tower.
In 2010, New York by Gehry was back on.
It became a fairly public event because when you stop building one of the only two buildings that are being built in the city in the darkest days of the recession, people take note of that. So this kind of played out in the press, which in some ways made it painful, but it allowed the entire city to reconnect with what this building was hoping to be and its aspirations.
When marketing began on the tower, some 5,000 images were posted on social media, none of which developers had anything to do with.
From the outside, it captivated the city. It captivated the intellectuals, it captivated those that loved architecture, it captivated the man on the street. Revealing what was happening inside became another great moment for us, because what we did was we built 900 plus units for people who rent. Here you had an ability to experience Frank Gehry at his best.
It's not typical for a person or an office of his stature to come design things besides the exterior, maybe the apartment design, but you'll see Frank's touch down to the detail of a doorknob.
The quality level in this building in the past been reserved only for condominiums. When we say renters by choice, but I think in this building you really need to underline the choice.
It was certainly an icon that brought a lot of focus to downtown. I think it's done wonders to the real estate pricing in downtown.
In the end, the world-class design would help make the project a very successful investment. But New York by Gehry, as it stands today, would ultimately come down to the resolve of a few, at a crucial hour, who would not back down from a dream to develop an iconic apartment tower with a world-class architect.